Push to tighten hate speech laws has hit a hurdle. After demanding that Parliament return early, the Coalition now is not happy with how the proposal has been drafted. Let's speak to the Shadow Energy Minister, Dan Tehan, for more on this. Dan, we'll see you back here in Canberra next week. A growing number of your colleagues, though, not waiting for the formal position of the party. Andrew Hastie, Jacinta Price, the latest to say they cannot vote for what they've seen. Do you share those concerns?
Well, what we've seen is an abject failure of leadership from the Prime Minister from the word go, sadly, on this issue. And what we need to see from him now is to put politics aside and get absolutely serious about uniting the people, the Australian people, and making sure that we can address this issue which is driven by anti-Semitism in a bipartisan way. Now, my advice for the Prime Minister would be to pick up the phone to Susan Lee and say, let's sit down, let's work through this over the weekend so that we've got a united position that we can put to the Parliament next week, instead of the approach that he's taking, which is all about division. And sadly, we're seeing that play out in Australian society. This is not leading to social cohesion that we all hoped it would lead to. What we're seeing is more and more division, and that is on the hands of the Prime Minister because he is failing to lead us through this crisis.
I'd like to add too that it's adding confusion as well, a terrible confusion. As a bricklayer, I work for Muslim men in different sectors of the masonry construction industry, good guys. But I said to one of the guys, I said, can you tell me about jihad? And he said, yeah. I said, yeah. He goes, well, if Australia went to war, we'd fight for Australia. And I've gone to myself, I never would have thought that would have been the answer in a million years. And he meant it. He said, I was born in Australia, I'm Muslim, but if Australia went to war, jihad, I'd fight for Australia.
Dan, has the opposition put forward amendments in good faith to the government that they can look at, or is this public posturing? We saw the criticism from Susan Lee last hour. She says the bill is virtually unworkable. How can you possibly redraft it that would see the coalition back it?
Well, we would be happy to try. We would be happy to try and fix it if the Prime Minister would act in good faith, but he won't. What he did was he lobbed this huge piece of legislation on the Parliament, which no one had the time to see. He's then said, all right, there will be a 2-day or 3-day parliamentary inquiry, which is simply not long enough to look at the detail and the complexity around this issue. And then he just played the most blatant politics that you could ever see by then lobbying gun law reform in with this issue. Now, I can tell you, everyone has seen it for what it is. It's blatant politics, and it's time the Prime Minister acted like a true leader during a national crisis. Instead of these games, you know what it reminds me of? It's the way Dan Andrews used to lead in Victoria, and it's like he's a chip off the old block. He just wants to play politics with everything and will not unite on an important issue, one of the most important issues that this country has faced for decades.
Dan Andrews advises Anthony Albanese, and Dan Andrews was the man that was caught out at the Chinese military exhibition for the leader of China. They're communists, you know, these Labor people.
I want to ask you about guns, but just on this point about it being rushed, it seems like a hard argument for the coalition to mount. It's rushed at the very same time Susan Lee called for Parliament to be back before Christmas. That would have been even more rushed legislation in terms of getting the details right, which we need to on hate speech laws.
Not at all, not at all. What we could have done is we could have had the commemorative service like we're going to rightly on Monday, but we could have done that before Christmas, which would have been the right time to do that. And then we could have begun the process of sitting down and working in a bipartisan way on addressing the issue that was before us. And we could have outlined general principles. We could have got a bipartisan committee formed that could have worked over the last 3 to 4 weeks to then be able to present to the Parliament something that we were all united about. Instead, the Prime Minister had to be led kicking and screaming to appoint a Royal Commission. We all know he tried to wait it out and tried to see whether Christmas and New Year would mean that a focus would be lost and we wouldn't have to have a Royal Commission. And then all of a sudden he's just dropped this legislation on the Parliament without giving it proper time. And he could have begun the consultation on this before Christmas. He chose not to. He chose to play politics, and everyone can see it for what it is. I can tell you out in my community, they just say to me, why the hell is the Prime Minister doing it this way? Because it just seems all about politics, nothing about the national interest. And if ever there was an issue that needed us to address it through the national interest, it's this one. And that's why it's such an abject failure of leadership from the Prime Minister, sadly.
Now you're about to see why the Jewish people bring themselves undone. They're not giving any consideration to the full scope and impact of these hate laws or the gun laws that they're trying to push in on the back of it. They're snatching and grabbing for anything they can get. No.
Australia's leading Jewish organisation has called on the federal opposition to look past its problems with Labor's hate speech laws and pass them for the greater good. Let's bring in political correspondent Cam Redden. Cam, I thought this was quite the significant intervention. Peter Wertheim was yesterday appearing at this parliamentary inquiry, scrutinising the legislation. He wants changes, but he does want it passed.
And he's respected on all sides of politics. Trudy, Peter Wertheim, one of the leading voices for the Jewish community. Let's show you this statement that the Executive Council of Australian Jewry has released today. It is a significant intervention calling on the coalition to pass these laws. I'll read it to you. It says, some of the opposition's criticisms of the bill are valid and repeat concerns which we ourselves have expressed about its shortcomings. However, there are also some important positives in the bill, including the introduction of a new listing regime to prescribe extremist hate organisations. It goes on to say the Council of Australian Jewry would urge the coalition not to allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. By all means seek to amend the bill to remove its shortcomings, but a wholesale rejection of the bill would not at all be warranted. In our view, the defeat of the bill would be a retrograde step. And this is the clincher of the statement. It says the status quo is no longer tolerable after the anti-Semitic terror attack in Bondi. We need legislative reform now, even if it is less than ideal. Peter Wirt.
Well, somebody must be paying him off because the bill doesn't mention Islamic radicalism, jihad at all, Islamic ideology at all. So there's something wrong there. The Jews need to speak to this bloke because he's falling short.
Was one of many faith leaders yesterday to raise concerns about this potential carve-out for the quoting of religious texts. He's worried that that might give some cover for hate preachers to continue to use their similar rhetoric. But all in all, the bottom line was he says the laws should be passed. But Susan Lee and the coalition is arguing that at this stage they believe the bill is unsalvageable and they will oppose it. Bridget McKenzie, the first coalition voice up today, responding to this on Sky News a short time ago, she says she hopes that this does not water down the view within the Jewish community that the coalition has their back. But it's my understanding that the coalition leadership had no idea this statement was coming.
He is telling the coalition, in his words, don't allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good.
Well, Trudy, as you said, it's breaking news. I'll read the statement with interest. I think as the Australian Jewish community knows what strong supporters we as a coalition have been of them and their issues over the last 2.5 years. There is absolutely no doubt that the Liberal and the National Party stand with the Jewish Australians.
So, Trudy, let's have a look at this legislation because the detail is critical here. And even though the coalition says it's unworkable because it doesn't target radical Islam, the government is pointing to this particular part of the bill. This is the rule around hate speech and targeting people because of their ethnicity, their racial or religious or cultural heritage, that would be a crime. If anybody feels unsafe or that their safety is threatened or they feel intimidated, that would meet the threshold. And it gives an...
So let's stop and have a look at this. Public promoting or inciting racial hatred. Now remember, apparently if somebody feels this way, even if you're not doing it, you could be sitting on the train reading your Bible or your Quran or whatever, and if somebody doesn't like it, this will apply to you. Number one, a person commits an offence if A, the person engages in conduct in a public place. What conduct? And the person engages in the conduct intending to promote or incite hatred of another person. Or a group of persons because of the race, colour or national or ethnic origin of the target or target group. No. Disseminate ideas of superiority over or hatred of another person. I hope you realise this covers a lot of it. If you got a bloke standing there in a dress and you're looking at him as if to say, what are you doing standing there in a dress? You're going down under 80.2 BF, the bill, right? Or a group of persons, the target group, because of the race, colour or national or ethnic origin of the target or target group, and the conduct would, in all the circumstances, cause a reasonable person. Now, see what you've got to understand, viewers, we don't live in a reasonable world anymore. We do not live in a reasonable world anymore. And let me give you an example of what I mean.
Why don't we just start there? Dr. Verma, I wasn't sure I understood your answer to Senator Moody a moment ago. Do you think that men can get pregnant?
I hesitated there because I wasn't sure where the conversation was going or what the goal was. I mean, I do take care of patients with different identities. I take care of many women. I take care of people with different identities. And so that's where I paused, I think.
Does that sound like a reasonable person to you?
Yeah, I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Well, the goal is just the truth. So can men get pregnant?
Again, the reason I paused there is I'm not really sure what the goal of the question.
The goal is just to establish.
Okay, so can a man get pregnant? I mean, we do not live in a rational, reasonable world anymore. That's why these laws that they're trying to bring in, they're to set people up to get into trouble.
Establish a biological reality. You just said a moment ago that science and evidence should control, not politics.
Absolutely.
So let's just test that proposition. Can men get pregnant?
I take care of people with many identities, but
can men get pregnant?
Many women that can get pregnant. I do take care of people that don't identify as women. That
can men get pregnant?
Again, as I'm saying,
this is a doctor. These are the people that you're trusting to look after you. I'm not even going to. She goes on for 5 minutes.
Singles out anti-Semitism, that if somebody is inciting anti-Semitic hatred against Jews in a public place where a reasonable member of the Jewish community would feel intimidated or fear for their safety, that would fall foul of the laws and attract up to 5 years in prison or 10 years for a hate preacher. Yes, it doesn't single out radical Islam, but the government's argument is that it covers anti-Semitism in all its forms, be that neo-Nazism, be that radical Islam, whatever. Here is Susan Lee, though, saying that in her view, it doesn't go far enough.
But from what we have seen so far, it looks pretty unsalvageable. It doesn't address Islamic extremism. It doesn't address ISIS influence. And it doesn't address the rise of anti-Semitism and the associated terrorist threat. Criminalise radical Islamic extremist hate preaching without impinging on free speech.